She had every reason to keep moving. At 17 years old, with empty pockets and rain soaking through her only hoodie, 2 bus transfers still stood between her and home. Not a soul in her life was available to pick her up. Yet Willa Reeves paused. An elderly woman stood by the curb, visibly shaken and disoriented, completely alone. She had no umbrella, no phone, and clearly no one expected her. Numerous people had already passed her by. Some cast a glance, but most averted their gaze. Willa unzipped her hoodie, draping it around the stranger's shoulders, then gently took her hand. She didn't inquire about the woman's identity, nor did she contemplate any potential downsides. She simply held on. That singular, perhaps foolish, yet undeniably beautiful decision was poised to alter everything. It was unfathomable to anyone present that this seemingly small moment would lead to such profound consequences. Anyway, let us commence today's narrative. The aged woman clung to Willa's hand, not out of desperation, but with the gentle reliance of a child finding a familiar anchor in an unfamiliar environment. Her fingers felt icy and frail, so delicate that they evoked images of Willa's grandmother's hands after countless hours spent at her sewing machine. "I need to return home," the woman murmured. "The blue door. My son will be concerned." "Understood," Willa replied. "Could you please provide your address?" The woman blinked, her gaze sweeping around before settling on Willa as if the question had been posed in an entirely foreign tongue. She carried no identification, no purse, only a sodden paper bag clutched against her ribs. Within it lay a half-consumed blueberry muffin and a pharmacy receipt so saturated that the ink was beginning to run. Willa retrieved her cracked mobile device and dialed 911. She was rerouted to the non-emergency services, where a recorded message indicated an estimated wait time exceeding 2 hours. 2 hours. She looked at the woman, who was still shivering and holding her hand. Leaving her there was not an option. Grandma Odessa's apartment occupied the 3rd floor of a building whose elevator had been out of commission since before Willa was born. It contained 2 modest bedrooms, a single bathroom, and a kitchen so compact that one had to turn sideways to open the refrigerator. Nevertheless, it was meticulously clean, comfortably warm, and filled with the lingering scent of whatever Odessa had been pressing that afternoon, a blend of cotton, starch, and a subtle hint of lavender. Odessa was at her sewing machine when the door creaked open. She looked up, her gaze falling first on Willa, then on the stranger. Her hands stilled. "Child, who is this?" "I found her at the bus depot," Willa explained. "She seems confused and can't recall her residence. I contacted 911, but they advised a 2-hour wait. I couldn't possibly leave her unattended." Odessa raised a hand, a clear signal that further explanation was unnecessary. She rose, walked to the stove, and began to heat water. Then she retrieved an old quilt from the back of the sofa, a patchwork creation she had meticulously sewn from fabric remnants over the past 2 decades, and gently wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. "Have a seat, dear," Odessa said, addressing the stranger, not Willa. The woman sat down, her eyes slowly taking in the apartment's details, the slightly faded wallpaper, the photographs adorning the shelf, and the small wooden cross suspended above the doorway. A subtle softening appeared on her face, as if a tense knot were loosening. Odessa placed a cup of tea before her, followed by a bowl of steaming chicken and rice soup, prepared that morning and intended to last for 3 days. The woman took a sip, her eyes closing contentedly. "You have remarkably kind hands," she told Odessa. Odessa settled into a chair opposite her. "Kindness incurs no cost. That's precisely why it's accessible to everyone." Willa leaned against the kitchen door frame, observing the scene. This was the woman who had raised her. This was the home she had grown up in. Despite the absence of material wealth, influential connections, or a safety net, When a drenched and frightened stranger appeared at their door, the kettle was immediately put on and the quilt was offered without question. That was the sole inheritance Odessa could bestow, and it proved to be more than sufficient. 14 miles away, a different kind of evening was unfolding. The Caldwell estate was secured behind ornate iron gates, accessed via a stone-lined driveway flanked by ancient oak trees predating the state's very constitution. Within the residence, the study exuded the rich aroma of leather and aged paper. A grandfather clock marked the passage of time with its steady tick. It was the sole audible sound, aside from the rhythmic scuff of Gerald Caldwell's shoes on the polished hardwood floor. He was pacing. 71 years old, a retired federal judge with distinguished silver hair and a sharp jawline, his posture commanded respect, reflecting decades spent presiding over courtrooms. Yet, on this particular evening, his hands betrayed a tremor. His mother had been missing for 6 hours. She departed the residence around midday, stated Diane Holbrook, positioned near the desk, her phone held firmly to her ear. In her mid-50s, clad in a tailored blazer, she possessed a demeanor of professional composure that, from a distance, appeared reassuring but felt like an impenetrable barrier up close. The caretaker reported that she stepped out for a stroll and never returned. Gerald ceased his pacing. She suffers from dementia, Diane. She was supposed to have constant supervision. That is the very reason we employ a caretaker. Diane's expression remained unreadable. I understand completely. I am currently coordinating with the police. Expedite your coordination. Gerald retrieved his own phone and dialed a number he had not utilized in months. Calvin, this is Gerald Caldwell. I require your assistance in locating my mother this very night. On the other end of the line, Calvin Moore answered on the second ring. A private investigator, a former military operative, the kind of individual who would respond to a call at 11 o'clock at night without demanding immediate clarification. He responded with 3 concise words. Send me everything. Gerald terminated the call. He stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Somewhere out in that downpour, his 74-year-old mother was alone, disoriented, and afraid. He pressed his forehead against the cool pane. Where are you, Mother? 14 miles distant, Eleanor Caldwell was seated in a small kitchen, enveloped in a handcrafted quilt, savoring a bowl of chicken soup prepared by a stranger. She had no recollection of her surroundings. However, for the first time in 6 hours, a sense of security washed over her. 5:30 in the morning. Willa's alarm buzzed from the fractured screen of her phone on the nightstand. She reached out and silenced it without opening her eyes. 3 seconds of quietude. That was all she permitted herself before rising. Her first action was to check the sofa. The elderly woman remained there, nestled beneath Odessa's quilt, her breathing slow and steady, considerably more peaceful than the previous night. Whatever turmoil had raged within her mind appeared to have subsided, at least for the moment. Willa navigated her morning routine with her characteristic quiet efficiency, as if she had long ago learned that the world waits for no one to be prepared. She opened the refrigerator. Half a carton of eggs, a few slices of bread, and a container of leftover rice. She prepared a lunch for school, 2 slices of bread with peanut butter, an apple showing the first signs of aging, and a bottle filled with tap water. She ironed her school uniform on the kitchen counter, as they did not possess an ironing board. The crisp white shirt and navy pants were both slightly too short. She had grown 2 inches over the summer, and there was no budget for new attire. She counted the cash in the envelope placed atop the refrigerator. $14. 5 days remained until Friday. This was the reality of Willa's existence. Not a tale of tragedy or melodrama, but one of constant scarcity. Every dollar was meticulously accounted for. Every decision weighed against the potential for loss, which was nearly non-existent. Her mother had departed when she was 6 years old. No note, no subsequent contact, just an empty closet and a silence that permeated the apartment for weeks. Her father, James Reeves, worked at a warehouse on the east side. A good man with strong hands, he was the kind of father who walked her to school each morning, regardless of the weather, testing her on spelling words along the way. He perished on a Tuesday in a forklift accident. The company attributed it to operator error, contested the insurance claim for 2 years, and ultimately prevailed. Willa and Odessa received nothing. Following that devastating event, Odessa became Willa's sole support. She dedicated 12 hours daily to sewing garments for others, ensuring Willa had dinner on the table and shoes on her feet. Willa began working at 15, cleaning offices on weeknights and stocking shelves on Saturday mornings. Every cent earned was placed in a jar labeled "Future." She had no clear vision of what that future entailed, but she understood it had to begin with community college, and community college required funds she did not possess. She harbored no bitterness, only exhaustion, a crucial distinction that most people failed to comprehend. That morning, Willa sat at the kitchen table with the paper bag from the previous evening. The pharmacy receipt, though damp, was now legible. It indicated a prescription for donepezil, a medication for early-stage dementia, prescribed to Eleanor Caldwell. The pharmacy was situated across town, deep within the affluent district, a part of the city Willa had never ventured into. She typed the name into her phone. The screen loaded slowly, as it always did. Then, a photograph appeared, an image from a society page capturing a charity gala. A woman in an elegant cream-colored gown stood beside a tall, silver-haired man in a tuxedo. The caption read, "Eleanor Caldwell and her son, retired federal judge Gerald Caldwell, at the annual Caldwell Foundation benefit." Willa stared at the screen, then glanced towards the couch. It was the same woman, though thinner and more frail, yet undeniably the same face. She showed the photograph to Odessa. Odessa examined the picture, then looked at the woman on the couch, and finally met Willa's gaze. "It makes no difference who she is connected to," Odessa stated firmly. "She is a person in need of assistance. We will contact them and ensure her safe return." Consequently, Willa called the public number for the Caldwell Foundation. She was transferred once, then twice, and finally a third time before a voice answered. "Caldwell Foundation, Diane Holbrook speaking." Willa recounted the entire situation. "I found her at the bus station and brought her home. She is safe and warm." A moment of silence ensued, followed by Diane's response, her tone devoid of its earlier warmth. "You have her? Where precisely? What is your name? How did you gain access to her?" Her questions sounded less like relief and more like an interrogation, as if she were building a legal case. Willa answered each question truthfully and comprehensively. Diane stated she would dispatch someone and terminated the call without offering thanks. Willa placed the phone down, a sense of unease settling upon her. She couldn't articulate it precisely, but she felt it. "I wait." So, this young woman has $14. That's it. 14. And then she discovers the woman sleeping on her couch is connected to considerable influence. And she doesn't immediately think, "What can I gain from this?" No. She simply calls to return her. No hidden agenda, no calculated maneuver. And I'm being completely honest here. Most people, no, they wouldn't do that. A black SUV appeared outside Willa's building the following morning. It was not the sort of vehicle typically seen on this street. A few neighbors on the stoop took notice, exchanging nudges. No one spoke, but all eyes followed. Calvin Moore emerged from the vehicle. Tall, impeccably clean-shaven, he was the sort of man whose movements suggested deliberate purpose. He wore a plain jacket and carried only his phone and a small notepad. Willa buzzed him in. He entered the apartment and paused. Eleanor was seated at the kitchen table, wrapped in Odessa's quilt, eating a piece of toast with jam. She looked up at him with the quiet curiosity one might direct at an unfamiliar visitor in their own home. No trace of fear, no flicker of recognition, only placid calm. Calvin stood there for a moment, observing his surroundings before speaking. The compact kitchen, the sewing machine in the corner, the photographs on the shelf, the quilt draped around Eleanor's shoulders. Everything bespoke modesty, cleanliness, and an intangible richness that money could not purchase. He took a photograph of Eleanor, then another of the apartment, not as evidence, but as a testament to the fact that this woman had been well cared for. He spoke with Willa in the hallway. "You performed a commendable act. Mr. Caldwell will wish to express his gratitude in person." Willa leaned against the wall. "She was cold. I couldn't just leave her." Calvin nodded, made a notation in his notepad, and then assisted Eleanor to the waiting vehicle. She held Willa's hand all the way to the doorway. At the last possible moment, she turned and looked at Willa, a look that might have conveyed recognition, or perhaps simply a lingering warmth. It was difficult to discern with her. "Thank you, sweetheart," Eleanor said. The SUV departed. Willa watched from the window until it disappeared around the corner. Odessa came up behind her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, child." Willa nodded, but a profound sense of loss settled within her, as if something precious had just departed the apartment, never to return. 2 days passed uneventfully, marked by school, work, meals, and homework at the kitchen table, while Odessa diligently sewed. Then, a letter arrived. Not a bill, not junk mail, but a genuine letter. It was enclosed in a heavy, cream-colored envelope, crafted from paper Willa had never before touched. She traced its surface with her thumb, noting its smooth, thick texture. It felt as though its cost exceeded her weekly lunch budget. Inside, a handwritten note on matching stationery read, "Dear Ms. Reeves, I would be deeply honored if you and your grandmother would join me for dinner at my residence this Saturday evening, as a personal expression of my profound gratitude for your extraordinary kindness toward my mother. Sincerely, Gerald Caldwell." Willa read the note twice before handing it to Odessa. Odessa read it once, removed her spectacles, placed them back on, and read it again. "Well," she declared, "I suppose I must prepare my best dress." Saturday arrived. Willa borrowed a pair of black flats from the downstairs neighbor. They were half a size too large, so she stuffed tissue into the toes for a better fit. Odessa wore her navy blue dress, the one she reserved for solemn occasions like funerals and church anniversaries, pinning a small brooch to the collar. Her hands were steady, but her eyes held a wide-eyed anticipation. A car arrived precisely at 6 o'clock. This time it was not the SUV, but a dark, quiet sedan. A chauffeur held the door open for them. The journey was largely silent. Odessa gazed out the window as the scenery transformed. Modest houses gradually gave way to larger residences, which in turn evolved into sprawling estates. Chain-link fences were replaced by imposing stone walls, and cracked sidewalks yielded to meticulously manicured lawns. The car turned onto a long, stately driveway bordered by ancient oak trees. At its terminus, the Caldwell estate rose majestically, an architectural marvel from a bygone era, constructed of stone, glass, and iron. A fountain graced the courtyard, likely consuming more water in a single day than Willa's entire building used in a week. Odessa whispered, "Lord, have mercy." Willa's gaze fixed on the imposing front door, crafted from polished wood, tall and substantial. She knew instinctively that she did not belong here. Every element of this place was designed for individuals of a different standing. However, she had done nothing wrong. On the contrary, she had acted with integrity. Straightening her shoulders, she walked forward. The dining room was so vast it rivaled the entirety of Willa's apartment. A magnificent chandelier, resembling frozen rainwater, hung suspended from the ceiling. The table, capable of seating 12, was set for 4. Fine white linen covered its surface, adorned with silver cutlery, and 3 forks were meticulously placed to the left of each plate. Willa observed them, silently resolving to wait and see which one Gerald chose to use first. Eleanor was already seated at the far end of the table, wearing a soft blue cardigan, her hair neatly styled. She appeared different in this setting, somehow smaller, as if the sheer scale of the house overwhelmed her. Yet, the moment Willa entered, Eleanor's face transformed. "The girl with the warm hands," she exclaimed, not recalling Willa's name, but retaining the memory of the sensation, which was sufficient. Willa offered a smile. "Hello, Eleanor." Gerald Caldwell stood at the head of the table, taller than Willa had anticipated. His height was complemented by impeccable posture, the result of decades of people rising to their feet upon his entrance. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and he wore a dark suit without a tie. His handshake was firm, yet not forceful. "Ms. Reeves," he stated, "I appreciate you coming." "Thank you for the invitation," Willa replied. Gerald then turned to Odessa, extending his hand. "Mrs. Reeves, it is a pleasure." Odessa clasped his hand. "Likewise, Mr. Caldwell. You have a beautiful home." "It is rather large for just 2 people," Gerald remarked. "My wife often expressed the same sentiment." They took their seats. A woman from the kitchen emerged, bearing the first course, butternut squash soup served in delicate white bowls so thin that Willa could almost see through them. She selected the outermost spoon, a correct assumption. The conversation commenced tentatively, a polite exchange as individuals from disparate worlds sought common ground without causing offense. Gerald inquired about Willa's schooling. She described her experience at a public school on the East Side, her preference for history, her challenges with mathematics, and her projection to graduate in the spring. He then asked about her future aspirations. Willa responded with unvarnished honesty. "Community college. I've been saving, but I haven't reached my goal yet. I work 2 jobs after school, cleaning offices and stocking shelves at a grocery store on Saturdays." She stated these facts plainly, without embellishment or a hint of self-pity. Gerald listened with the keen attention of a judge, carefully considering every word, not for weakness, but for its inherent truth. "And after community college?" Willa paused before replying, "I'm not entirely certain yet. Perhaps social work or possibly law, something where I can advocate for those who lack a voice." Gerald gently set down his spoon and regarded her for a prolonged moment. "Why law?" "Because," Willa explained, her voice steady, "when my father died, no one fought for us. The company had legal representation. We had nothing. I was 12, and I remember thinking that if we had someone skilled in using words as their weapon instead of physical force, perhaps things might have unfolded differently." A quietude settled over the table, not awkward but profound, the kind that descends when a deeply resonant truth is spoken and felt by all present. Odessa lowered her gaze to her soup, her jaw clenched. She rarely spoke of James. Some wounds, though perhaps closed, never truly healed. Eleanor broke the silence, reaching across the table to pat Willa's hand. "You remind me of someone," she said softly, then furrowed her brow, attempting to grasp a fleeting memory. It eluded her, yet she smiled nonetheless. The main course arrived, roasted chicken, green beans, and potatoes, prepared with an artistry that elevated simple ingredients. Willa ate deliberately, not due to lack of hunger, but to savor and retain the experience. Midway through the meal, Gerald and Odessa discovered a shared connection. Odessa had performed alterations for a law firm downtown approximately 15 years prior. One of the senior partners was a man named Walter Brennan, who, coincidentally, had served as Gerald's colleague on the federal bench. Odessa recounted how Walter always had his suits tailored far too tightly. Gerald chuckled, a genuine sound of amusement. He still does. The atmosphere in the room warmed, not from the fireplace, but from a more profound source. Following dinner, Gerald invited Willa to accompany him for a stroll. They traversed a hallway lined with framed photographs. Gerald shaking hands with governors, Gerald addressing a podium, Gerald with his late wife at a formal event where attendees were impeccably dressed and wore practiced smiles. His study, situated at the end of the hall, was a sanctuary of legal texts, a mahogany desk of considerable size, and framed commendations, awards, and letters from senators. Willa stood in the center of the room, careful not to touch anything. Gerald sat on the edge of his desk, adopting a relaxed posture, as if attempting to diminish the room's imposing aura. "Willa," he began, "I chair the Caldwell Foundation. We provide scholarships to young individuals who demonstrate exceptional character, not solely based on academic achievements or test scores, but on their inherent character." Willa remained silent, awaiting his words. "I would like to offer you a full scholarship," Gerald continued, "covering tuition, books, and a living stipend to the university of your choice." The room seemed to subtly shift, just enough for Willa to instinctively reach for the back of an adjacent chair. She did not weep or falter. She stood remarkably still for approximately 5 seconds. Then she asked, "Are you serious?" Gerald nodded. "May I have it in writing?" Gerald met her gaze and then smiled, not a polite formality, but a genuine expression. "You would make an excellent lawyer, Willa." They shook hands. Willa's grip was firm, her eyes brimming, yet she maintained her composure, a testament to a lifetime of resilience. The drive home was silent for the first 10 minutes. Odessa gazed out the window, observing the gradual regression from estates to houses, then to apartment buildings, and from stone walls back to chain-link fences. Suddenly, Odessa began to cry, not audibly, but with silent tears tracing paths down her cheeks, catching the streetlight at intervals. Willa reached over and clasped her hand. "Grandma." "I'm all right, darling. I'm perfectly fine. Your father would have—" She faltered, pressing her lips together and tightening her grip on Willa's hand. They continued the remainder of the journey in a comfortable silence. Upon their arrival home, Willa checked her phone. A text message from an unknown number read, "Be careful what you accept from people like that. Nothing is free." She stared at it, reread it, and then deleted it. She told herself it held no significance, yet she found sleep elusive that night. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Diane Holbrook stood in the doorway of Gerald's study, her arms crossed. Her posture remained consistent, but a sharper edge was detectable in her demeanor. "You barely know this girl, Gerald. A background check at the very least." Gerald didn't lift his gaze from his papers. "She gave my mother the coat right off her own shoulders, Diane. That's all the vetting I require." Diane offered a slight nod. "Of course." She then turned and proceeded down the corridor. Her heels echoed on the polished marble, a measured, confident sound, the rhythm of someone already strategizing several moves ahead. And none of those considerations involved Willa Reeves getting any closer to this family. For a period, matters settled into a comfortable state. Not flawless, certainly not effortless, but good. And for Willa, good was more than sufficient. She began the process of applying for the scholarship on a Monday evening, seated at the kitchen table. She encountered forms she had never seen before, filled with terminology such as institutional verification and disbursement schedule. She conducted online searches for every term she did not comprehend, which comprised the majority of them. Yet, she meticulously completed every field, using black ink, without error. On the following Wednesday, she set foot on a university campus for the very first time. She navigated the central courtyard, a printed map clutched in her hand, striving to appear as though she belonged. The library spanned 3 distinct levels. 3 levels. Willa stood in the main hall, gazing upwards. She remained there for nearly a full minute until a passing student inadvertently brushed against her and offered an apology. She shared the news with Terrence Davis on a Saturday morning. Terrence operated the barber shop situated 2 blocks from Odessa's residence. He had been her father's closest companion since their high school days. A man of considerable stature with a soft-spoken demeanor, the sort of individual who remembered your birthday and always knew precisely how you preferred your hair styled. When Willa informed him about the scholarship opportunity, Terrence set down his clippers. He looked at her. His eyes welled up, and he made no attempt to conceal his emotion. Your father would be so exceptionally proud, he would be unable to speak. Willa lowered her gaze to the floor, a small smile gracing her lips, and offered no reply. Some sentiments require no verbal affirmation. That Sunday, Pastor Nolan Brooks made mention of it during the worship service. It was a modest congregation, numbering around 40, perhaps 50 individuals. When he spoke Willa's name, the congregation applauded. She bowed her head, feeling a touch of embarrassment, but she was smiling so broadly that her cheeks ached. Odessa affixed the scholarship acceptance letter to the refrigerator door using a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Then came the matter of Eleanor. Gerald contacted her midweek. His mother had expressed a desire to see the young woman. Would Willa be amenable to visiting? She went on Thursday, following her school day. They convened in the gardens situated behind the grand estate. The afternoon was pleasantly warm. Eleanor was lucid that particular day, her eyes clear and her presence fully engaged. She spoke to Willa about her late husband, about raising Gerald as a single parent after his passing, and about the common misconception that wealth inherently simplifies life. People tend to forget, Eleanor remarked, that money does not provide warmth. They sat together until the sun began its descent. 2 individuals with seemingly little in common, united by the singular element that truly signifies. They genuinely liked each other. From an upstairs vantage point, Diane Holbrook observed them. She retrieved her mobile device, initiated a call, and spoke in hushed tones. We have no record of the exact words exchanged, but whatever was conveyed, its impact had already begun to manifest. It transpired on a Tuesday. Willa was in her 3rd period history class when the classroom door swung open. The principal stood in the doorway, clad in a charcoal suit, his expression stern, the kind of countenance adults adopt when about to impart information they have carefully rehearsed. Willa, would you mind accompanying me, please? She gathered her belongings. The entire class observed her departure. No one uttered a sound. Yet she sensed the weight of 30 pairs of eyes upon her as she walked away. 2 detectives awaited her in the principal's office, a man and a woman. The gentleman was leaning against the windowsill. The lady occupied the chair designated for students. Neither of them offered a welcoming smile. Willa Reeves? That is correct. We would like to inquire about Eleanor Caldwell. Willa took a seat. She clasped her hands in her lap, a gesture of composure her grandmother had taught her. Maintain a steady, respectful posture, even when experiencing fear. Stand tall. The questioning commenced at a gentle pace. How did you locate Eleanor? Where did you escort her? How long did she remain at your residence? Were there any other individuals who interacted with her? Willa provided answers to every query, offering the same responses she had previously given to Calvin Moore, the same responses she had relayed to Diane Holbrook over the telephone. The truth remains constant, thus her account did not deviate. Subsequently, the tenor of the conversation shifted. The male detective leaned forward. We have received information indicating that Mrs. Caldwell was wearing a diamond bracelet the night she disappeared, a valuable heirloom estimated to be worth several $1,000s. That specific bracelet has not been recovered. A knot of unease tightened in Willa's stomach. I never observed any bracelet. The report specifies that it was on her wrist when she departed the Caldwell estate. I cannot speak to that. When I discovered her, she was in possession of a paper bag. That was all. No adornments, no bracelet, nothing. The female detective opened a file. You brought a disoriented elderly woman to your home. You housed her overnight. You delayed contacting the authorities until the following morning. I contacted 911 that very evening. They instructed me to wait 2 hours. I was unwilling to leave her unattended at a bus station in the pouring rain for 2 hours. However, you did take her to your dwelling, to your apartment, where you reside with your grandmother, whose livelihood is derived from her work as a seamstress. There it was, the underlying implication beneath the inquiries, not concerning Willa's actions, but rather her identity, her background, her financial circumstances. The male detective articulated it with unvarnished directness. You expect us to accept that you simply took an elderly, confused woman into your care out of pure altruism? Willa met his gaze directly, mirroring the expression her grandmother adopted when confronted with an ignorant remark and deliberating whether to offer correction or entrust the matter to a higher power. Yes, Willa responded, because that is precisely what occurred. They released her, advising her not to depart the city, and provided her with a card bearing a case reference number. She exited the school building. The hallway was deserted. All students were engaged in their respective classes. The sound of her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum echoed off the walls as if pursuing her. The scholarship application process was placed on hold that afternoon, pending the outcome of the investigation. A formal communication from the Caldwell Foundation arrived in her electronic mail, professional in tone and impersonal in its wording, containing phrases such as temporarily suspended, due diligence, and resolution of outstanding matters. Willa read it at the kitchen table. Odessa read it over her shoulder. For a considerable duration, neither of them uttered a word. Back at the estate, Gerald stood within his study, the door firmly shut. Diane sat opposite him, her legs crossed, her hands neatly folded, the very picture of someone delivering unwelcome tidings they had long anticipated conveying. I noticed the bracelet was absent the day after Eleanor's return, Diane stated. I initially hesitated to mention it. I harbored the hope that it would surface, but it has not. Gerald's countenance was strained. You initiated a police report without informing me? I filed it to safeguard the family's reputation, Gerald. That bracelet was your mother's property. It has been a treasured heirloom within your family for 3 generations. And you suspect this young woman took it? Diane paused, carefully selecting her words. I believe a 17-year-old from that particular neighborhood had your mother in her apartment overnight without any supervision. I believe the bracelet was present when Eleanor departed this house and was missing when she returned. I am not levying accusations. I am requesting that you consider the potential. Gerald offered no immediate response. He turned towards the window, the same window against which he had pressed his forehead in distress the night Eleanor went missing. Gerald, I understand your inclination to perceive the best in individuals, Diane commented, her tone softening, almost tender. However, this young woman originates from humble circumstances. That bracelet is valued at more than your grandmother earns in an entire year. You must, at the very least, entertain the possibility. The weight of her words permeated the room. Gerald remained silent, and his silence was more potent than anything Diane could have possibly orchestrated. The narrative disseminated with remarkable speed. A local online publication was the first to feature the story. The headline proclaimed, "Teenage Samaritan accused of pilfering from elderly woman she claimed to have rescued." The comments section became inundated with responses within mere hours. Some individuals defended Willa's character. The majority, however, did not. Those who condemned her employed language that clearly indicated the issue transcended a missing bracelet. It was about a black young woman in a white woman's home. It was about the preconceived notions that arise when these two elements are juxtaposed. At school, friendships began to falter. Not all of them, but a significant number. The girls who had previously saved her a seat at lunchtime suddenly found their tables occupied. A teacher whom she admired actively avoided her gaze in the corridors. At the grocery store where she worked on Saturday mornings, her manager discreetly approached her. "Perhaps it would be best to take a few weeks off, Willa, just until this situation resolves itself." He delivered this suggestion as if conferring a significant favor. Willa walked home that evening. It was raining once more, the same kind of downpour as the night she found Eleanor, heavy and pervasive, the sort that penetrates everything. She sat on the stoop of her apartment building. She was without her hoodie. She had relinquished it that night at the bus station and had never recovered it. She sat there in the persistent rain, her arms encircling her knees, devoid of an umbrella, without a hood, utterly alone. Odessa emerged from the building. She too lacked an umbrella. She sat down next to Willa on the damp concrete, close enough that their shoulders made contact. She did not offer platitudes such as, "everything will be all right." She did not invoke divine intervention with, "God has a plan." She refrained from uttering any of the predictable phrases people resort to when at a loss for words. Instead, she stated, "You understand your own character. Do not permit anyone to redefine it for you." Willa's eyes were visibly red. "Perhaps I should simply abandon this endeavor, the scholarship, the entirety of it. Cease attempting to occupy spaces where I inherently do not belong." Odessa turned and regarded her granddaughter with an intense gaze, reminiscent of how she examined fabric before making a cut, with precision and unwavering certainty. "My child, you have a rightful place wherever your character leads you, and your character guided you to a woman lost in the rain. Do not, under any circumstances, offer an apology for that." Willa leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder. The rain continued to fall unabated. Neither of them moved. Calvin Moore found himself unable to sleep. 3 days had elapsed since the police report was filed. 3 days since the narrative appeared on the online publication. 3 days since a 17-year-old girl's name had become associated with terms such as thief, suspect, and even more disparaging labels. And something about the situation did not sit right with him. He sat at his desk in his modest, meticulously kept apartment. The surface was covered with notes and printouts pertaining to the Caldwell case, not the alleged bracelet incident, but the original investigation into the night Eleanor went missing. He accessed the photographs he had taken at Willa's apartment that morning, depicting the kitchen, the quilt, Eleanor consuming toast, and Willa standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, neither demanding nor performing, simply a weary young woman who had performed an act of kindness. The bracelet was conspicuously absent from all the images, not on Eleanor's wrist, not on any surface, not visible anywhere. Calvin opened his notepad, turning to the page containing his initial conversation with Diane Holbrook. She had informed him that Eleanor was wearing the bracelet when she departed the estate that afternoon. This was the very foundation upon which the entire accusation rested. However, Calvin had also obtained the daily log maintained by the caretaker, a standard procedure for patients with dementia. Every medication administered, every meal served, and every personal item accounted for. He located the entry for that particular day, 2:15 p.m. Eleanor's jewelry removed prior to her afternoon constitutional, as per routine. Bracelet, ring, and necklace placed in the bedroom jewelry case. Calvin reread the entry, then a third time. The bracelet had been removed before Eleanor left the residence. She had not been wearing it when she wandered to the bus station. She had not been wearing it when Willa found her, which unequivocally meant it had never been present in Willa's apartment. This indicated that someone had been deliberately untruthful. Calvin delved deeper. He submitted a request for financial records from the Caldwell Foundation through a contact at the auditing firm. The information he received caused him to set down his coffee cup and remain utterly still for an extended period. Small monetary transfers, dozens in number, were dispersed across a span of 4 years. Funds were moved from the foundation's operational accounts to a third-party vendor that, to Calvin's assessment, did not genuinely exist. The payments were consistently authorized by the same individual, Diane Holbrook. The aggregate amount approached $600,000. Calvin now understood. The accusation regarding the bracelet was never about the jewelry itself. It was about creating distance. Diane needed Willa removed from the family's proximity. A young woman so close to Gerald, so close to Eleanor, spending time within the house, posing innocuous questions, observing details. Sooner or later, she might perceive something that Diane could not afford to have brought to light. The accusation served as a defensive barrier, erected swiftly and crudely, designed to instill sufficient fear and preoccupation in the 17-year-old girl, forcing her to dedicate all her energy to self-defense rather than setting foot in that residence again. Calvin reached for his telephone and dialed Gerald's number. "We need to converse, in person, this evening." They convened in Gerald's study, the door secured. Calvin meticulously presented his findings: the caretaker's log, the photographic evidence, the financial statements. Each piece of information was laid out sequentially, much like a legal brief. This approach was fitting, as he was addressing a man whose professional life had been dedicated to scrutinizing precisely this type of evidence. Gerald did not interrupt. He remained seated in his leather chair, his hands clasped. His facial expression remained unperturbed, yet his knuckles had turned white. When Calvin concluded his presentation, the room was engulfed in a profound silence. "How long?" Gerald inquired. "At least 4 years, perhaps longer. The earlier records are more challenging to trace." Gerald closed his eyes. 15 years. He had placed his trust in this woman for 15 years. She managed his schedule, his household, his mother's care, and his foundation's finances. She was the last person he communicated with most evenings and the first voice he heard most mornings. And she had been systematically defrauding him throughout that entire period. However, it was not this revelation that caused his chest to tighten. What caused his chest to constrict was the image of a young woman seated on a rain-soaked stoop. A young woman without a hoodie, without legal counsel, and with no one advocating on her behalf except a 70-year-old seamstress. A young woman whom he had almost been convinced was a thief because a woman in a well-tailored blazer had uttered the correct phrases with the appropriate intonation at the opportune moment. He opened his eyes. "I need to see Willa." Calvin offered a nod. "I will drive." Gerald shook his head. "No, I will drive myself." Gerald Caldwell piloted his vehicle to Willa's neighborhood for the first time in his life. He eschewed his chauffeur and his large SUV. A silver sedan that appeared ostentatious in his driveway seemed ordinary on these streets. He parked at the curb directly in front of Willa's building. A group of teenagers congregated on the corner, casting glances his way. An elderly gentleman seated in a folding chair near the entrance observed his approach to the door without uttering a word. Gerald depressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. Odessa's voice emanated from the speaker. Cautious, guarded. "Who is it?" "Mrs. Reeves, it's Gerald Caldwell." A prolonged pause followed. Then, the door unlocked with a distinct buzz. He ascended 3 flights of stairs, The elevator was non-operational. By the time he reached the third floor, he was slightly out of breath. He contemplated Willa's daily ascent up these very stairs, after work, after school, laden with groceries, without ever voicing a complaint. Odessa opened the door. She regarded him with an expression more resolute than their initial encounter. Not anger, but something more subdued. The look of a woman assessing whether the man before her merited admittance. She stepped aside. Gerald entered the apartment. The same kitchen table, the same sewing machine, the same collection of photographs on the shelf. The very room where Eleanor had consumed toast and felt secure. Willa was seated at the table. She did not rise. She did not offer a smile. She looked at him, her gaze expectant. Gerald took a seat opposite her. The chair felt small. The table was diminutive. Every element within this room was modest in scale. And Gerald Caldwell, a retired federal judge, a man who had shared meals with governors and argued cases before the Supreme Court, sat in this compact kitchen, feeling the full immensity of what he had nearly permitted to occur. Willa, the accusation was entirely false. She did not react, not immediately. The bracelet was never misplaced. The caretaker had removed Eleanor's personal adornments prior to her afternoon constitutional. This fact is duly documented in the daily log. The bracelet was present within Eleanor's bedroom for the entirety of that day. Willa's hands rested flat on the table. She applied a slight pressure downwards. This was the sole indication of movement. The police report was initiated by Diane Holbrook. Without my knowledge, she fabricated the entire claim. Gerald continued. Calvin uncovered evidence that Diane had been systematically misappropriating funds from the foundation for a minimum of 4 years. The accusation concerning the bracelet was deliberately conceived to estrange you before anyone could detect the financial discrepancies. The refrigerator emitted a low hum. Somewhere outside, a car horn sounded. The scholarship is hereby reinstated, effective immediately. I have been in contact with the authorities to formally withdraw and expunge the report. He glanced at his hands, then returned his gaze to Willa. I am profoundly sorry. I should have scrutinized the matter the instant Diane presented it to me, rather than allowing even a moment of doubt to fester. You deserved a higher standard of consideration. Both of you did. He directed the latter statement towards Odessa. Her arms relaxed, albeit subtly. Willa remained silent for a considerable interval. I am relieved that you believe me, but I need you to understand something. I would have consistently maintained the truth, irrespective of whether you chose to believe me. Gerald nodded slowly. Character is not defined by your actions when observed, he stated. It is defined by your actions when unobserved. He spoke as if encountering this notion for the very first time, like a man who had spent his professional life evaluating others and was only now grasping the true essence of that concept. Because a 17-year-old young woman possessing $14 and borrowed footwear had imparted this profound lesson to him. He extended his hand to Willa, then to Odessa, before descending the 3 flights of stairs and remaining in his vehicle for a period before igniting the engine. The subsequent morning, Gerald found Diane at her desk. Her laptop was open, her coffee untouched. She looked up as he entered and immediately comprehended the gravity of the situation. He placed a folder on her desk. The caretaker's log, the financial audit, Calvin's report. I entrusted you with my confidence for 15 years, Diane. She opened the folder. Her facial expression transformed with each subsequent page, not shock, but a dawning recognition. The visage of someone who had always anticipated this moment and had simply been gambling that it would not occur today. I was acting to protect you, Gerald. That young woman could have been anyone. She was someone who assisted my mother when you were supposed to be overseeing her care. Gerald, if you would permit me to explain the financial irregularities, the caretaker's log. You dismissed her early that afternoon to curtail expenses. However, you did not achieve any savings. You instead pocketed the difference. And as a consequence of sending her home, my mother departed alone and ended up lost in the rain for 6 hours. Diane's mouth parted, but no sound emerged. You will be hearing from my legal representatives and the police. He exited the room, closing the door behind him without looking back. 2 days later, Gerald delivered a brief statement to a select group of local journalists at the Foundation's offices. He publicly acknowledged Willa's compassionate act. He asserted that the accusation was entirely unfounded and had been instigated by a trusted employee's personal motivations. He did not identify Diane by name. The online publication that had initially published the story issued a retraction. The sentiment expressed in the comments began to shift. Not universally, of course. Some individuals remain unyielding in their convictions. However, a sufficient number altered their perspectives. At school, classmates resumed interacting with Willa, reserving seats for her, offering statements such as, "I always felt that was unjust." Willa responded with grace, offering smiles and expressions of gratitude. Yet she took note of those who had remained steadfast and those who had withdrawn their support. She would not forget either individual. That Thursday, Willa visited Eleanor at the estate. Eleanor was experiencing a favorable day, alert and lucid. She was seated in the garden when Willa arrived, a smile gracing her lips before Willa had even uttered a greeting. Eleanor took Willa's hand, mirroring the gesture Willa had offered her at the bus station. Gentle, assured. "I do not always recall details, sweetheart, but I distinctly remember the sense of security you instilled in me. Safe." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and withdrew a small card, yellowed with age, inscribed by hand. It was a recipe for lemon cake, her late husband's preferred dessert. "Family recipes are intended for family," Eleanor stated. Willa held the card in both hands. She offered no verbal response. She simply held it, in the manner one clutches something possessing a value far exceeding monetary worth. Because indeed, it did. 6 months later, Willa Reeves moved into a dormitory room at the university. It was the first time in her life she had occupied a room exclusively for herself. 4 walls, a desk, a bed that was solely hers, a window offering a view of a quad where students traversed between classes, carrying books, coffee, and futures they likely took for granted. Odessa accompanied her to assist with unpacking. She brought a suitcase, a box of kitchen necessities, and the sunflower magnet from their former refrigerator. They possessed little in the way of material possessions. The task did not require much time. Willa affixed 3 items above her desk: the scholarship acceptance letter. A photograph depicted her father positioned outside the industrial structure where he was employed. He wore a smile, his arms were folded, and he carried himself with the demeanor of a man who anticipated a brighter tomorrow than the present. Alongside it lay Eleanor's treasured recipe card for lemon cake. Odessa found herself in the center of the room, executing a slow, deliberate rotation. She brushed her fingertips against the surface of the desk, her hand tracing the pattern of the bedspread, before turning her gaze towards the window. "Your father," she remarked, "would have personally hauled every single one of those crates up those flights of stairs himself." A pause followed. "And then he would have settled right onto that very bed and wept." The retort came, "He would have tried to mask his tears." Indeed, that too. They embraced for an extended duration, a clasp so profound that neither wished to be the first to disengage. That same evening, Willa initiated contact with Gerald. Eleanor's condition was stable. A new caregiver, thoroughly scrutinized, had been engaged. The organization had undergone a comprehensive audit, and was subsequently reorganized. Diane was facing legal repercussions. Gerald had initiated a new endeavor, the Eleanor Caldwell Character Award, a grant established to support young individuals who exhibited exceptional altruism without any expectation of personal gain. Willa was designated as the inaugural recipient. Her path, however, would not be the sole illuminated one. Approximately 1 week into the academic term, a parcel arrived at her dormitory. Upon opening it, she discovered her hoodie, the very garment she had presented to Eleanor at the bus station. It had been laundered and neatly folded, exuding the scent of lavender. Adjacent to it lay another hoodie, identical in style but crafted from a superior material. A handwritten inscription from Gerald accompanied it, stating, "Eleanor was adamant we return the original. I, in turn, insisted on adding a spare. G.C." Willa chuckled, then donned the original hoodie. It still fit perfectly and evoked the familiar comfort of her own essence. She gathered her satchel and departed for her inaugural lecture. Midway across the central campus lawn, her attention was drawn to a young woman seated alone on a bench, her backpack at her feet, her head bowed. The girl's posture conveyed a sense of profound disorientation, an inability to ascertain her bearings, coupled with an embarrassment that precluded her from seeking assistance. Willa reduced her pace, then halted. She sat down beside the solitary figure. "Hello," Willa inquired gently. "Are you all right?" The girl's head snapped up, her expression a mixture of surprise and palpable relief. "I am utterly and completely lost." Willa offered a reassuring smile. "Come with me. I'll accompany you." They rose in unison and proceeded across the quadrangle, two individuals, previously unknown to each other, now walking side by side. This is precisely how it often begins. Some narratives conclude with momentous events, with grand displays, with thunderous applause. This particular story, however, does not culminate in such fashion. Its conclusion is marked by a hoodie, a modest, well-worn, safety-pinned hoodie that a young woman, possessing nothing herself, had given to a stranger on a night when no one was observing. That particular hoodie did not alter the trajectory of the world. It profoundly reshaped the lives of two individuals. Perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, that amounts to the same thing. Willa Reeves had not sought a scholarship. She had not requested the attention of a powerful benefactor. She had not clamored for justice, for vindication, or for a place of prominence. She had simply observed a woman standing in the downpour and thought, "She must be cold." And that realization proved to be sufficient. Eleanor Caldwell now struggles to recall many of her days. The encroaching dementia progresses with an unhurried but relentless pace. However, on those occasions when clarity prevails, she inquires about the girl with the comforting touch. And when Willa visits, Eleanor clutches her hand with the same steadfastness as she did that very first encounter, as if clinging to irrefutable evidence of goodness in the world. Diane Holbrook awaits her trial. The foundation has been thoroughly reestablished. The Eleanor Caldwell Character Award has already provided financial backing for 3 additional scholarships, benefiting young individuals whose innate compassion resonated more powerfully than their challenging circumstances. As for Willa, she is now in her 2nd semester. She continues to wear the original hoodie, and she still pauses to offer assistance to those who appear to be struggling. Wait, allow me to interject for a moment. This is precisely why I chose to share this narrative. Because Willa's actions brought to mind a fundamental truth. Kindness requires no justification. It needs no audience. She perceived someone in distress and possessed the capacity to help, so she did. It is as simple as that. And, if this account resonated with you in any way, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. We have more stories of a similar nature in development.